A very warm welcome to all of you. I know it's holiday time, even more grateful for us that you are joining this session. It's a session topic that we had on the agenda for quite a while, and we decided now to do this also in the conversation with some of the association executives, secretariats, who felt that good governance becomes just simply a much more important topic. Also maybe feeling that if boards and committees would have maybe acted on a good governance basis 3, 4, 5 years ago, they maybe would have come a bit more smoothly through this pandemic. So many reasons to look at good governance. I would like to also welcome and thank our AssociationWorld Partners, the Barcelona Convention Bureau that just signed and renewed the agreement with AssociationWorld for another year. So we're grateful for that, and also Visit Brussels, an all-year-round partner for us. Sarah, who is on the panel as an expert today, representing Curia, has been a partner from the beginning and the existence of AssociationWorld, and we've done a number of sessions throughout the last year. So thank you for your commitment, and also for your commitment to share that knowledge to our association community. We have ID Loom, Sebastian and his team quite committed, and also supporting the upcoming GF, the Geneva International Association Forum, and a new organization and company that has just joined us just a week ago, which is Open Social. We are launching our community engagement platform in September, and we will do that together with and through the Open Social platform, dedicated AssociationWorld platform, to allow our community to just interact and engage the way in a very decentralized way. So I would like to just give some background basically on why we felt we need to do this session, simply because that we feel now that this is the right time, going in the second half of the year, organizations starting to plan, having also, of course, AGMs and board meetings, important decisions to make. And we just wanted to start the dialogue on good governance and explain a bit, and together with you work out a bit the difference. What is the difference between good governance and good governance? How do we move from just an administrational part where we act upon the bylaws and statutes to actually good governance, and what that means in to move that forward. So it's an ongoing a dialogue that we would like to start today. It's a kickoff of an initiative that we are launching officially at the GF, at the Geneva International Association Forum this September, where we like to, together with collaboration partners that we wish to collect now and also recruit, and maybe many of you are interested in this as well, becoming a partner, but that at GF we are announcing and launching this initiative that will be almost an all-year-round initiative to basically create a white paper that becomes the reference for international associations, European associations, and non-profits when it comes to good governance. And I'm glad to say that we have Mogens on the panel today, who has done this process internally through ISCA, and will explain that a little bit, how that went and what the success stories were. But we just felt that there was not one single document that was endorsed or is endorsed by many, or the large number of associations that becomes that guideline or that white paper to sort of administrate and develop good governance principles, let's say. So from that point of view, we are looking also not only for your participation, but also for your involvement and engagement. Ideally also you showing interest in the initiative when we share at the end of the session a link that will ask questions whether you maybe would personally like to be involved in the co-creation of the document, or maybe your association has implemented good governance and is happy to share further information, or if you even believe that your organization or association is interested in helping to move forward and promote to other associations that they pledge good governance at next year's European Association Week that we will launch at the end of May. So enough talk, moving forward. We have a great panel put together specifically on this topic, people that are all passionate about the topic and like to stick the needle a little bit in some of the issues that we're discussing. And for that reason, we felt they're appropriate to be on here. And I would like to introduce Sarah Verschaeve again, who is our partner and is really, to me, the expert in nonprofit law in Belgium. Of course, when we talk about other countries, the different legislation applies, but today we talk about good governance, and then of course that is a much broader topic that should not only apply on a national level. I would then also like to mention again Filipe, who I just learned this some weeks ago, that Filipe has a background in law. And for that reason, I think he also shares that passion for good governance. We're simply just looking at, how to do things right. Filipe is an association coordinator with Interel Association Management, but also a human rights advocate, and works with a lot of other nonprofit organizations on a national, European, and international level to help and advise them on different topics related to strategy and also governance in general. So, Filipe, thank you for devoting your time to this. And last but surely not least is a gentleman based in Denmark, Mogens Kirkeby, who is the president of ISCA, the International Sports and Culture Association, and has, as mentioned, gone and led way back already in 2012 and 13. I mean, now we are here back talking about that same topic, but who has led with ISCA together the initiative on good governance in grassroots sports, endorsed and supported by the European Commission, and Mogens will speak a bit about that. Mogens is also a member of DGI. It's the Danish leisure sport organization that also has global initiatives, quite interesting organization. And as a Dane and a Scandinavian, is of course very focused on good governance, democratic processes, transparency, all the things we want to see when we implement good governance. And thank you, Mogens, for joining us this morning. So we get started with the first questions, and that actually goes to, please ask your questions. You will have the chance to right away individually, verbally also ask your questions to the panelists and experts, but please also place your questions into the chat, and we will surely then cover that as well. So currently we have 35 people on there, and I think it's a very good number, not too little, not too many, that we can allow and really have an engaging discussion with everyone. Of course, when you think about let's say the legal point of view, we talk about governance being more a legal process based on documents, statutes, bylaws, all the things that Sarah helps develop for associations. Sarah, I mean, in a nutshell, how do you define actually the difference between governance and good governance, from your personal point of view? I know that there's, I don't even know if there's a legal term to define good governance, but what in a nutshell is that to you?
First of all, thank you for the very kind introduction, Kai. And you immediately start with a difficult question, because from what I know, there is no such thing as a proper definition of good governance, which of course does not mean that good governance has not been defined numerous times in articles, scientific contributions by European institutions. Just to give you an example of the definition given by the OECD already some time ago. So the OECD defined good governance as a set of relationships between an association, it's that company, but we translate everything today to association, between an association's board, its management, its members, its other stakeholders, also as a tool that provides the structure through which the objectives for an association are set, and also providing the tools to attain these objectives. But all these definitions that are given in articles by European institutions, also by national institutions, they first of all differ a lot from each other. In most cases, they remain rather vague. And in any event, they never cover all the different aspects of good governance. And that is also why we see, at least in the Belgian governance codes or the Flemish governance codes, that they do not try, at least most of the codes do not try to give a definition of what is good governance. They much more focus on what are the aims, what are the objectives of good governance, what have companies and associations to win if they live by the principles of good governance. And that can, for example, be add to the professionalism of the association in the eyes of third parties, have an advantage in the recruitment markets, guarantee the continuity of the association in the long run, etc. But overall, the main advantage of living by good governance principles is always the long term. So the long-term sustainability of the association, the long-term value creation, the long-term success. And when we do find a definition in good governance codes in Belgium, we see, for example, in the Flemish sports codes, they define good governance by emphasizing certain principles. So in this Flemish sports code, it is defined as a set of administrative patterns characterized by transparency, democracy, internal accountability, control. And then specific recommendations are given for each of these big principles. But if you would ask me, what is that about good governance? I think that I can concur with what is set out in the Belgian Corporate Governance Code of 2020, which is the most recent one. And that is in fact something that very well aligns with the principles of AssociationWorld. So it says, in the end, good governance is about people. And it's about their values, it's about their skills, it's about how they interact with others. And again, in the end, it's all about the long-term success of the association. So there is no actual or proper definition, but we come a long way with all these principles.
Yes, thank you, Sarah. I mean, Filipe, talking about national good governance or corporate good governance codes, I think you have your opinion there about that and how that actually relates to, let's say, more international codes. I don't know, do they actually exist? What's your point of view about that national corporate codes versus what we are trying to do?
So first, thank you, Kai, for the introduction, but also thank you, Sarah, for the amazing introduction to my topic as well, because you will probably, without any surprise, realize that I'm in favor of all of them, just because I think as a principle, they all are built, or at least they follow the same pattern. Then, of course, that will lead to a few questions, probably more for no profit related to the purpose in compared to corporate, as well as, composition of the board that has been changing a lot. And I think have a kind of a different approach on a no profit that he has for a corporate or another or a profit association. But I think on a level of principle, and especially the Belgium code for 2020, I think if you have no idea where to start, or even the principles that you should be aware or just ask to your board, to your staff, to your members, that's a good start, really, to just go back to these codes, because it will be extremely hard to disagree with the principle of openness, transparency, control, planning, all of that. And I think this is what all these codes are doing, is they are trying to give a frame, not that much to just fully be implemented directly, but much more a frame to be used as a kind of a pattern during a brainstorming phase, during a discussion with your board, into where do we stand, where do you want to go, and what are then the key elements we need to take in consideration when we are revising our governance. And I think that's why I'm a huge fan of all these codes, just because to me, all of them provide an entire step-by-step question to be asked, but unfortunately, as Sarah has mentioned, no answer.
No answer is sometimes a good answer, but not today. Today we need to find some answers. And you mentioned something there. How do we start this? How does one start this process? We come to that a bit later. I want to move to Mogens, and thank you again for sharing your expertise, your direct expertise, having gone through that process, and hopefully that is a good example for other associations to understand, but also to see how they could actually, what could be done and how they could do this with their own members and beyond, of course. So Mogens, I know you have a presentation to share a little bit just about the sector, because every association is so different. So please share with us a bit of how that relates to the sector that you are
very
active
much.
in.
Thank you, Kai. Yeah, a brief introduction to this sector, because I think many are not familiar with the part of the sector that I represent, because quite a few are familiar with the sports sector, but the sports sector is very different from each end of it. And we are in this participation sports sector, and that means also that we use not sport as much as we use other terms for this activity. We use move, we use moving people, we use physical activity, because the sector is quite different from what you see in television. I normally say what I represent is everything else than you see in television about sport. ISCA has 260 member organizations, and these members are from all over the world and are very different. They are very different because they are different in size. We have organizations with 1,000 members and with 5 million members. We have organizations with no budget and with 40 million euro budget. So they are, of course, very different, but they all work on a national and regional or local level, where they provide services, activities, you can say grassroots sport or recreational physical activities to individuals. So this is the offer. The sports sector is quite a huge civil society movement. Alone in the European Union, there are 70 million people who are members of a sport club. And they are governed in different ways, normally with democratic-based statutes, board, volunteers, maybe some professional management. But it's a huge membership base and a huge number of entities. And the fundamental reason that we went into this issue is that we historically, but also today, have something precious to protect. And we have the precious token called participation and confidence of the citizens. And that has been very strong in the sports sector a long time. But I must also say that in late 90s and beginning of a millennium, we saw in the other part of sport, the very visible part of sport, some issues that were not necessarily good governance. And therefore, we feel sure that it's important to go into grassroots sport, good governance. And this is the reason, because as you might not be aware of, the participation sector or the grassroots sports sector of the sports sector, the element of the sports sector is the biggest in numbers when it comes to people involved, clearly, because only few are at elite level. It's necessarily also the part of the sports sector with most governing bodies, like clubs and associations. And it's also, and that is quite a surprise for many, it's also the part of the sports sector which contribute to the biggest financial turnover. In total, in the European Union, that's made a report that the sports sector is providing 2% of GDP. 2% of GDP for, just for similarity, is bigger than fishing, agriculture, and forestry together. But this is not a small business, and it's the business primary economic turnover is driven by consumer demand. So you go in a sport club and you need shoes or you need transportation. So the consumer demand here is what creates the turnover. It means that if there were no entities providing that, there were less consumed. The sports sector is also an employment-intensive sector. It means that there are more employment than GDP should, so to say, believe there should be. And it's also a heavily youth employment sector. For 16 to 30 years old, the employment in sports sector is twice as big as in the average. So that is the big reason for making sure that there is some good governance, or try to make sure there is some good governance in that sector. And this is, as Kai introductions spoke about, we in 2011 suggested a project to the European Commission about good governance in grassroots sport. Basically, we think whatever happens in the sports sector, the visible part of sports sector, should maybe also be reflected in the grassroots sports sector. But I can tell you, when we introduced this to our members, they said, we don't need it. We don't have any problems. We don't have any money. We don't have any conflict of interest. So we don't need it. But it's pretty easy in any case, small or big association, to illustrate where the potential conflicts, governance issues should be. So we can quite easily try to illustrate where it's needed. Because as a leader, any type of leader, you not necessarily have to look around the next corner, but you should be prepared what could be around the next corner. Otherwise, you become defensive. And also, as Sarah mentioned, we are quite using some of the similar areas. We didn't invent this because we have no experience here. So we hooked up with Transparency International, German department, to assist us in doing this. And we try to find what is relevant for this sector and these type of entities. And we focus on these three things here: the inclusion of stakeholders as part of the democracy process, and then the core of the democracy process, that you can be open, and of course transparency and accountability. So these were basically issues that we circle around, and then we try to find solutions and inspirations, because we cannot say to our members, you have to do that. We don't have that power. We don't want that power, but we can inspire and say, consider if some of these issues are for you. And I had the chance to present at some congresses, and it's pretty easy to make dilemmas. It's pretty easy to find dilemmas in the your daily work, and then we start the discussion. What are you doing in this dilemma? It doesn't necessarily, there's not a rule saying you should do this and that. But in your circumstance, in your situation in the country, what should then be the best solution of these dilemmas? And dilemmas are fantastic discussion points. So I use that very much. So that's what we did. We also did this, it's some kind of motivation. It's a self-assessment tools. And we all know if you push the button of self-assessment, somebody will tell you you don't do enough. And that is, of course, hopefully some kind of motivation. And that's what we did also back in 11, 13, and 14.
Thank you very much, Mogens. We come back to some of that later, and please raise your questions if you have any directly. By the way, the documents will be shared with you as well. I think even Sina has a link to that self-assessment document there. But I mean, in any case, I mean, you know, when we talk about a slightly different topic, cross-collaboration amongst our association sectors, I think ISCA is a perfect one to engage in cross-collaboration, because a lot of what ISCA does, it's not only about sports or leisure sport, but it's actually about well-being and healthy lifestyle. And now I'm looking at Carrie and I'm thinking, you know, clearly there is an alignment between what, you know, Carrie's organization at UICC and others do. Marija from Life Learning Platform is also on here. There is an alignment between ISCA and the Life Learning Platform. But clearly, you know, when we talk about healthy lifestyles, physical activity, we talk about you know, prevention of certain diseases, illnesses. Clearly, there is cross collaboration, and I think what we need to do as associations is think about that much more. You know, where and how can we create and form this cross collaboration sector, you know, beyond to what we do, and where are the alignments, and how do we benefit and create new dynamics there. But just as a side note, because I always get a bit you know, swifted away, because you know, it's clearly what we do too little. At the same time, we come back to the topic, and want to go back to Sarah, and asking, I mean, how do you work? I mean, is there an intent, a natural intent by associations to say, Sarah, can you help us in Curia with the implementation of good governance? How does it, you know, what is written, what is not written? I know Colm Clark on here, we just had a discussion the other day, who says, you know, Kai, I'm interested in this initiative, but I'm only interested in the elements that relate to you know, good governance and strategy and operations, and not only what is written in the bylaw, because it goes so much beyond the bylaw in real terms. I mean, how does an association start this process?
Yeah. So there is no one way in which such a process is started. I must say that most associations that come to Curia, to me, they usually come with questions that are either related to their articles of association, internal rules, delegation of powers documents. So because I am of course a lawyer, and so most of the questions that are addressed to me relate in one way or another to these points. And then association asked me, well, as a first question, are these documents still in line with Belgian legislation? But then in addition to that, they also ask questions that come from problems linked to the internal functioning of their governing bodies. And maybe it would be interesting maybe to give a concrete example of that, if that's okay. So one of these examples may be linked, for example, to the powers of the General Assembly. That is just one example that sometimes pops up. Because as all of you know, good governance mainly concerns the board on the one hand, management on the other hand, but the General Assembly is definitely also a body that should not be overlooked when it comes to good governance, because the General Assembly has a very important supervisory role in associations. And sometimes it is difficult for a General Assembly to effectively exercise this supervisory role. And when associations come to me with a question on a review of their articles of association, that is sometimes also a question that comes up. How can we involve our members in a better way? Because we have a General Assembly that meets only once a year. We see very different representatives of our member associations participating in the General Assembly each year. As a consequence of that, they are not very familiar with how the association is run. So it is also very difficult to make sure that the General Assembly can effectively exercise its supervisory role. And then we can make certain suggestions how they can deal with that. For example, providing that member associations, they need to appoint a permanent representative that will always represent them in a General Assembly, or maybe with a substitute. So that is one thing. Also make sure that members receive information in time. But another aspect, and that is also very important, and I have seen in certain files that this is a real issue, that is really respecting the powers of the General Assembly. What we see in some associations is that the powers of the General Assembly are a bit eroded, and in most cases eroded by the boards. Concrete example, appointment, reappointment of board members. That is a exclusive power of the General Assembly. In most associations, in all not-for-profit associations, also in most international associations. But sometimes this power is a little bit eroded because the list of candidates needs to come from the boards. And then in certain associations where you have opposing view between certain groups, and you have a certain group that is over-represented or has a majority representation in the board, sometimes the boards dismisses or deletes certain candidates from the list, sometimes for objective reasons, sometimes for less objective reasons. And then you have this reduced list of candidates that is proposed to the General Assembly. And as a consequence, the powers of the General Assembly to decide on the appointment of board members is a bit eroded or restricted. And then we say, well, you can easily deal with that by, for example, providing that the General Assembly can also nominate or propose candidates at its own initiative. So if it considers that a candidate is qualified, well, then it can just at its own initiative propose a certain candidate. But that is just one specific example, many more examples. But that is why associations come to us. So not only for a legal check, but also with these very practical issues that have created problems, and then asking questions, how can we deal with that? How can we solve that? Sometimes the solution lies in an amendment of their bylaws, in an amendment of their internal rules, because it's very important to have a clear framework of rules, but it evidently goes much further than just these clear rules and provisions.
Yes, thank you, Sarah, for making that important point, because the question is indeed, what is the role of the General Assembly? And I think sometimes the General Assembly is a bit unclear about that, because the current boards or leaders leave them a bit in the dark and always provide information on what is a must to have or know and what's nice to know. And since we talk about that, before we come to Filipe with the question how he sees good governance being applied and that he's working with, I actually want to put Colm Clark on the spot here. Just simply, if you allow, Sarah, you talked about also decision making. Colm actually wrote an article, I remember, not too long ago, about the power of right decision making. Colm, do you want to just let's share a bit about our conversation, about what you were saying, good governance, strategy, operations, and decision making, just for a minute or two? I would be thankful for that.
Sure. Thanks, Kai, for the chance to contribute. It's always been a topic that's been very close to my work with associations, and I think part of the issue with this especially when we talk about not just governance and let's call it compliance, but actual good governance that facilitates the way the organization operates, is there's always something that people are more excited to talk about. There's always going to be an event or a publication or a report or a research project, whatever it is, that's always going to be a nicer topic for people to get into than governance reviews. And the other part of it, of course, is that the other thing is there's no quick fix for this. There's not something you can buy. You can get a legal opinion, you can get a consultant or a facilitator, you can buy all of these things, but ultimately that is the beginning of something, because after that, no matter how good your process is or your bylaws are, you then have to actually have the discipline to implement it. And that, of course, in the association space means working with lots of different people who are more or less bought into the process. So, I think this is just, it's such an important topic, because it's so important, I think, for the overall performance of the organization, but it's very much beneath the surface. So that's why I was very interested to hear about the initiative, because I think, if we look at how to improve association performance, there's a lot of talk about agility, for example, at the moment, and there's a lot of talk about how you can facilitate with that with tools. But I just think this whole governance and the good governance part is really at the core, and it's very closely linked as well to the organizational culture. And what I've seen in a lot of cases is it's very closely linked to the professional, let's say, tendencies, almost personality tendencies you get in certain types of organizations or certain groups of professionals who might be very, very strong in some parts and very, very weak in others. So just to give a specific example to conclude on, I mean, I've seen a group who were in a profession that required people to be extremely process driven. So when it came to their formal governance procedures, they were literally bulletproof. I've never seen an organization produce process documents like they did. But whenever it came to implementing pretty much anything, they got absolutely blocked all the time, because somebody would always come up with a formal objection to the process going to paragraph 17.2.1a to find a reason why somebody shouldn't do what they were doing. So on a human level, on a process level, they were brilliant. On the human level of moving things forward, they found it almost impossible to make progress. So thanks for that, and enjoy the rest of the conversation.
I mean, I love that. And you're using some important keywords that we at first sight wouldn't think relate to good governance, but it's about organizational culture. It's about behavior. And I think that's a lot what it is about. Just trying to do the right thing in a way, and being less process and procedure driven. And that is also definitely a cultural element. Thank you, Colm, for that. Sorry to put you on the spot. Filipe, I mean, how do you see good governance being implemented with some of the organizations that you work with? Or Benita, I see Benita also one of the team members at Interel, or the lack of good governance. And of course, how do you approach that with them? How do you bring that mindset? How do you try to shift the mind to good governance?
So maybe to start, I definitely agree with Sarah and the governance model about bylaws and statutes. I think it's still a key component, obviously, of it. What I have realized that has changed, or at least I've personally been asked more to work on, was the concept of values, ethical behavior, as well as efficiency. We really went from this compliance model and say, I've took the decision as it's stated on the bylaws, so I'm doing right in terms of governance. Now to switching a bit the model and say, that's correct in terms of process, but I'm not sure that actually is that meet your results or your objectives. So therefore, you might not be actually having a good governance system, even you respect your bylaws. And at least in my experience at the moment, sure, of course, we still come back to these key documents, but I think they are starting to be a bit more a tool. Once again, a frame, just to not lose where we stand and what do we need to do. But I think the main work starts in terms of ethical values and efficiency as well. And I can give you, what an example of that is, for example, the budget allocation, and say, well, how do we decide where our money goes? Some might have an entire policy about it. Some might actually be based into specific values and say, when the board needs to take decision, these are the values they need to take in consideration, or these are the priorities they need to remind why taking a decision. And I didn't see that in the last 5 years, and I'm saying this more and more in terms of behavior, at least from the board, as well for members. I must also say, in terms of value, and Sarah and as well Cole has mentioned the idea to be engaged, that's also something they require. And I think transparency, it's nothing new, but I think the engagement might be a bit different now. So I think, yes, ethical values and efficiency are definitely for me a new component that was not discussed before while doing bylaws and statutes exercise.
Yes, thank you, Filipe. We come back to some of the things you mentioned right now. I just want to say that there is quite interesting chat going on. Benita shared a great document that could also be a reference, so please have a look at that. And there's a bit of chat between John and Heidi going on there about voting, online voting, General Assembly, and so on. So thank you for being active on there as well. I mean, let's say moving to Mogens. Mogens, what would you say was the legacy of that initiative and project? How is that document that was created and supported by the EU being used today? Do you see associations doing better as a result of it? Is that something that, why was that important for the EU that ISCA led this initiative?
In the sports field, the European Commission and not least the European Parliament has a strong focus on grassroots sport participation for good reason. It's not very visible, but that is actually the case. And I think they are very interested in good governance across the whole field of the sports sector. You can say that in a small entity, the governance issues are as big as they are in a huge international entity, but the consequences are not the same. So it's more the idea that if we have bad governance across the line, we will lose confidence among citizens, and that means loss of participation, and that means a lot of other things which are not good. As an umbrella organization, we have to walk the talk. We did a few changes, imposed a code of conduct at the board level. We also think we are first movers because our sector is quite conservative sector. It does not change fast unless you have COVID. I'm sorry. It changes not very fast because it has a 200 years history. Many of these organizations are more than 100 years old. So there is you can say, conservatism. And we have to be first mover, not too far ahead of the fastest one, but we have to be ahead of the fastest one and show what is potentially the next move. And I normally say that resistance is the first sign of change. And I can tell you there were resistance because it's not for us. We are all these kind of things, but it's very easy, as I said, to show a dilemma, a very small dilemma, and say, what do we do here? And then you get the dialogue. I'm also very concerned that we are in a business of living people, and we are not trying to kill initiative and risks, but try to avoid the big risks. Let's say when we have the General Assembly, there are 20% of members are present, and that means 40, 50 organizations, and they come with 40 or 50 different types of statutes, different types of handling that General Assembly. So there is not a model that fits all. So we have to say, this is our model. We have to be clear. We have to show very consequently what is go and no go here. And the easiest way is to be very transparent. You can ask anything, you can see it, you can have it online, even the fee of the board members, whatever, it's there. And that's not usual, but it's much easier. I'm not sure this changed overnight. I think it's said already there's no quick fix, but quite a few of the big organizations, they took initiative to make a national course with external partner, for example, Transparency International. And I think we have to also just to say that part of this is to make you aware that this is an issue that will come after you if you don't deal with it. And I think this is a little bit of a threatening legacy, but it's also the other part is we have some solutions for you. We cannot say what you should do, but according to your size, the way you work, try to find 3 or 4 key points that you will work on. And they are different, and they should be different. And dilemmas are different across the world, but try to find the big ones and solve them.
Mogens, that leads actually in my next question, because we have today very different type of associations by sector, but also small, medium-sized, large type of events, industry-funded associations, non-industry funded associations, volunteer-driven organizations. So when you say that, and this question goes out to anybody who wants to answer it. Is the first discussion with a board for all type of organizations the same? I mean, considering what you all the elements that you mentioned, is the approach different, or are there similarities in terms of what you're trying to, to achieve, let's say, as a patient organization versus a trade organization, with very different, one organization having people on with, primarily being there for goodwill. They want to volunteer, they feel committed to the cause, they feel a sense of belonging. On the other hand, you have large trade type of organizations who are lobby machines, advocacy machines. I mean, how do we look at that?
Just a few comments. The easiest way to get people not to listen is to offend them. They will listen shortly to you, but then they will not listen anymore. So it's very, I was very cautious when we introduced this to say, we are in a solution partnership now. We might slightly offend you down that road, but don't take it personal, because if we introduce to a board who said, we don't have a problem with governance, we introduce 2 dilemmas which are spot on for that board, they are slightly offended. But then we have a dialogue. Let's say the mayor or the vice mayor is in the board of the organization. Is that a problem? No. Is it not? Okay, let's give an example where it could be a problem. And then we have a dialogue. So I think it's very different from type of organization, goodwill organization like ours and others. I can only answer for this part. Thank you.
Maybe I can add to that I fully agree that it's not a one size fits all. So you have these different codes. They definitely offer quite some useful inspiration. Many of the recommendations will be useful for different types of organizations, but the way in which these recommendations are implemented, evidently you need to look at the size of the association, you need to look at the needs, the activities, the vision of the association. So evidently that also needs to be taken into consideration. For just an example, the roles that a board will play will also depend on the type of the association. So in some associations, bigger associations and federations in particular, boards will play a strategic role, a purely strategic role and a supervisory role towards the management. In small associations, you will have boards that also take up operational tasks, maybe because you don't have a management or only one person working part-time dealing with the administration of the association. So And then you have evidently situations in between those two extremes. But so, yes, you certainly need to take into account the specificity of the association, and it's not just a copy paste of all the principles set out in the 2020 Belgian Corporate Governance Code, because that has been written for listed companies. So it would have a very strange result if any association would just try to do its utmost to implement all these principles. So I think you need to look at these principles. You need to look at the different codes and then make a selection of topics where you want to start. So I agree with Mogen. Start maybe small, try to work on certain items, certain points, make an improvement, and then when you have reached a result on these points, that will also give a motivation to continue to work on other points. So yes, so.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make a point to John's comment there. John is saying in the chat, poor governance can cause all the good work of an association to unravel. And there are a few comments to that as well. And I mean, that is definitely the case. I think there is the friction sometimes between the secretariat and the office who want to do things right, and the board making decisions that the staff or the secretariat doesn't necessarily understand. I've been involved with a large association a number of years ago. If I would write a book about the governance in that association, people would think that this story is invented and that this is a fake story. But it was true. And now 6 years later, that organization has lost 4 of their 10 key partners that contribute 50% of the funding to their annual budget. So I think that story generally continues. And I think board members don't often realize the impact that actually has when partners or staff members are not committed to the organization anymore because of the lack of good governance or bad governance in general, and decision-making process and all the things that we discussed. There's one element. Are they generally questions from the audience to the experts? I see Diana has a question. Do you want to just ask that question instead of me reading it out, Diana? Would that be good?
Sure. I was just curious if there's any advice surrounding rules or governance when an association is trying to create more of online, like an open networking community for their members, where you don't want it to be overbearing or a lot of work. You want them to be able to freely exchange, but you also have to ensure the platform and the process remains productive and isn't misused.
Thank you, Diana. John is raising hand.
If I may, Kai, I would comment that online platforms and discussion groups are a great idea, but they shouldn't supplant or take over the role of the board of directors. The board are still legally responsible, and they can take all the input in the world, but whatever happens on an online feedback from the members, a board is going to be the people on the board are going to get in trouble for what happens in the association, and they can't blame what was said during an online chat room. So boards can't delegate their responsibility.
Any feedback from the panelists on that? Filipe, Sarah, Mogens?
Yeah, you're saying that we are aware of what happened in the social media, also if they criticize what we do, but I am more aware of what people say at the General Assembly.
Yeah, maybe also to add to that. So in my opinion, it can be a good idea, such a platform, to increase the involvement of the members in the operations of the association. But of course, the official involvement moments cannot be overlooked, such as Mogens says. Decisions will need to be taken at the occasion of the General Assembly meeting, and members should also be incentivized to effectively participate in that meeting, and the association should also undertake sufficient efforts to convince members to participate in that meeting. But apart from that, such a platform certainly offers other opportunities. I think if you have such a platform, it needs to be very clear what the rules are on that platform, and the members need to know that that platform will also be monitored, because it cannot become a platform for insulting the management or the board. So if you have a platform, I think that a set of rules, ethical rules and principles would definitely be worthwhile considering, and also really telling the members that that platform will be monitored. So if they really have confidential messages, they can do it in a WhatsApp group, but everything that is on that platform should be an open communication. But apart from those side remarks, I think it may be a good way to increase the involvement of the members.
Yes, and Diana and John actually started an entire new discussion on this, which is Filipe and I talked about this in the preparation of this, is the role of the boards, and the functions. And I mean, we all know that how sometimes board members are elected. They don't necessarily have a real role or function or job description. It's friends voting friends, regional people voting their regional people on it for some reason. And I'm not sure if we have now time to go into that because we have 2 minutes left. But I mean, this is actually what this is all about. It's about starting that dialogue and continuing that dialogue. And we have different milestones now in the next months to come. We would like to launch this initiative together with collaboration partners on the 16th, 17th of September, when we do a live event, hopefully in Geneva with the Geneva International Association Forum. The other milestone to discuss this ongoing will be at our BF event that we are launching, the Brussels International Association Forum, towards the end of November, early December. And if I could just ask Sina to share, we have prepared a link for those of you or your associations who are interested in maybe becoming a collaboration partner or a content partner of this initiative to sign up. And just to want to make that point, this is an open platform, open dialogue, and as more people we get involved in this, as better it is and more acceptable the outcome will be. So I would like to, I actually hate to stop it here because, I think we're just getting into the juicy stuff. But I would like to thank again the panelists and the experts, Sarah, Filipe, Mogens, for making yourself available during vacation time. Even though Simon said it's raining cats and dogs here in Brussels. If I look out of the window, hopefully it's a bit better where you are. But the three of you, thank you so much for your expertise, for your commitment to what we do to advance association education. And again, also, and I have to always say that, I mean, the partners that we are looking for and we're working with, whether it's Barcelona Convention Bureau, Visit Brussels, IDLUM, Curia, Open Social, Interel now as well, we are all in the same boat and have that same interest. And I think that is, there will never be more knowledge in the room than when we have it now, because besides the three experts, we probably have at the moment 37 other experts out there who can talk about the governance and the lack of good governance and good governance in general. And that is what we try to embrace and motivate everybody to do. If there is no other question, we would close the session on time. Thank you to all of you out there.